Across from Jerusalem's old city, beyond the golden shimmer of the Dome of the Rock, rises a ridge lined with olive trees. This is no ordinary hill. Prophets once walked here. Kings found refuge here. Jesus prayed and ascended here. And generations have chosen to be buried here, believing it to be the gateway to resurrection. This is the Mount of Olives, a place where geography meets faith, where history merges with prophecy, and where the past and future are both carved into stone. So what is the Mount of Olives, and why does it still matter today? The Mount of Olives is not a single peak, but a ridge of hills that runs along the eastern side of Jerusalem. It rises about 2,600 feet above sea level and overlooks the old city across the deep Kidron Valley. The ridge is named for the olive groves that once flourished across its slopes, some of which survive to this day. For thousands of years, olives were a staple of the region's economy, providing oil for food, ritual, and light. From the summit, the view is unmatched. The walled city of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, and beyond, the rolling Judean desert stretching toward the Dead Sea. This unique vantage point explains why the Mount of Olives became both a lookout and a sacred space. For the Jewish people, the Mount of Olives has been sacred for over 3,000 years. The Hebrew Bible records that King David fled across the mount when his son Absalom rebelled against him. The prophet Ezekiel described the presence of God departing Jerusalem and coming to rest on this ridge. For centuries, Jewish poets and rabbis wrote about the Mount of Olives as a place where heaven touches earth. Medieval Jewish travelers who reached Jerusalem often described standing on the mount as a spiritual climax, looking over the Temple Mount and imagining the rebuilt temple. Among the graves here are figures such as Rabbi Ovadia of Bartanura, the famed commentator on the Mishnah, who died in Jerusalem in the early 16th century. To be buried here was not just about resurrection, it was a final statement of identity, belonging, and faith in the future of Jerusalem. The Mount also became the most important Jewish cemetery in the world. Graves here date back to the First Temple period, nearly 3,000 years ago. Today, more than 150,000 Jewish graves cover the hillside, including rabbis, leaders, and ordinary families. Why here? Jewish tradition teaches that when the Messiah comes, the resurrection of the dead will begin on the Mount of Olives. To be buried here is to await redemption at the very front row of history. For Christians, the Mount of Olives holds equally deep meaning. The Gospels record Jesus often visiting the Mount to pray, teach, and rest. One of the most famous places on its slopes is the Garden of Gethsemane. It was here, beneath ancient olive trees, that Jesus prayed the night before his arrest. The garden symbolizes struggle, sacrifice, and ultimate faith. The Mount of Olives is also remembered for the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, commemorated on Palm Sunday. According to the Gospels, Jesus rode down the slope of the mount while crowds greeted him with palm branches, proclaiming him as king. To this day, thousands of Christian pilgrims walk the same path every Palm Sunday, waving palm leaves and singing hymns, retracing the steps of that first procession. The Mount, therefore, is not only a site of prayer and sorrow, but also of joy and celebration. And when Jesus delivered the Olivet Discourse, a sermon about the end of the age, the Mount itself became part of the message. Sitting above Jerusalem, with the Temple Mount in full view, the words carried a weight that would echo through Christian teaching about prophecy, vigilance, and hope. The Mount also features in the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus spoke to his disciples about the end of the age and the coming of the kingdom of God. Finally, Christian tradition holds that Jesus ascended into heaven from the Mount of Olives, 40 days after his resurrection. Churches today mark these sites, from the Church of All Nations in Gethsemane to the Chapel of the Ascension at the summit. The Mount of Olives is also significant in Islam. It lies within Jerusalem, the third holiest city in Islam after Mecca and Medina. The Quran and later Islamic traditions tie the mount to eschatology, the events of the end of time. Some traditions hold that on Judgment Day, the righteous and the wicked will be judged here, near the Haram al-Sharif and the Kidron Valley. The Mount of Olives, facing the Temple Mount, becomes part of this sacred landscape of final accountability. Islamic scholars also connected the Mount of Olives to the Sirat, the bridge that souls must cross on Judgment Day. The idea that this narrow bridge would stretch from the mount across the valley toward the Haram al-Sharif added to the sacred geography of the site. Many Muslims believed that the balance of deeds would be weighed in this area where mercy and justice meet. Over the centuries, Islamic travelers wrote about the awe they felt gazing at Jerusalem from the mount, understanding it as a threshold between this world and the eternal one. The Mount of Olives has not only been a spiritual site, it has been a stage for history. In 70 CE, when the Romans besieged Jerusalem, their legions camped on the Mount of Olives, preparing for their assault on the city and the destruction of the Second Temple. During the Crusades, armies fought over its slopes, recognizing the mount's symbolic power. In the Ottoman period, the mount became both a cemetery and a place of pilgrimage for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Jewish communities continued to bury their dead here, while Christians built new monasteries and churches to mark sacred sites. Russian Orthodox pilgrims in the 19th century established the striking Church of Mary Magdalene, with its golden onion-shaped domes that still gleam on the hillside. Each empire and community left its imprint, layering the mount with architecture, memory, and devotion. In the modern era, the mount also became caught in the Arab-Israeli conflict. After 1948, when Jordan took control of East Jerusalem, the Jewish cemetery on the Mount of Olives suffered desecration. Tombstones were broken, graves vandalized, and stones repurposed for construction. Only after Israel captured East Jerusalem in 1967 did restoration begin, and families were once again able to visit and bury their loved ones on the mount. This period of loss and recovery deepened the emotional connection many Jews feel to the site. In the 20th century, it became part of the battle for Jerusalem. After 1948, the mount was under Jordanian control, and Jewish access to the cemetery was restricted. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel regained control of East Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives reopened to Jewish burials and pilgrimages. Today, the Mount of Olives is both a living community and a place of pilgrimage. Its slopes hold churches, mosques, synagogues, monasteries, and thousands upon thousands of graves. The Mount of Olives is not only a site of prayer, but also one of daily life. Palestinian neighborhoods, such as Al-Izariya and At-Tur, spread across its slopes, creating a living community alongside the cemeteries and churches. The juxtaposition of modern homes, ancient tombs, and sacred shrines makes the Mount of Olives a vivid portrait of Jerusalem itself, layered, contested, and alive with meaning. Tour buses, pilgrims, local families, and schoolchildren all share the same narrow roads, making the Mount not a relic of the past, but part of the heartbeat of the present city. Tourists and pilgrims walk the Palm Sunday route, descending from the summit toward the Old City, retracing the path Jesus is said to have taken. Worshippers kneel in the Garden of Gethsemane beneath olive trees that some say are nearly 2,000 years old. Families visit the ancient cemetery to place stones on the graves of loved ones. And from the top of the mount, the panorama of Jerusalem remains one of the most unforgettable views in the world. The Mount of Olives endures as more than just a hill. It is a symbol of exile and return, of sacrifice and redemption, of prophecy and fulfillment. For Jews, it is the site of resurrection. For Christians, the place of Christ's prayer, passion, and ascension. For Muslims, a marker in the landscape of judgment and faith. It is a place where heaven and earth seem to meet, where time folds together, and where faiths converge on the same stones. The Mount of Olives is a mountain of memory and meaning. From ancient kings to modern pilgrims, from prophets to everyday believers, countless lives have been shaped by its story. It is more than geography. The Mount of Olives, a mountain where history, faith, and destiny still meet. Like and subscribe for more travel history adventures.